Welcome to another episode of the Tracer Podcast, where we have discussions that will help you get faster. I'm your host, Joey Wilson. I'm a co-founder of Tracer. I'm a professional engineer, a technologist. I'm an obsessive student of endurance sports. And to introduce my guests, I'm going to tell you a story about me. As a child, I spent countless days climbing with my father, Ted Wilson. And one of our favorite places to climb was the Tetons. My father was a ranger and a guide in the Tetons, so I spent a lot of time there and hiking and climbing in the range. And the Grand Teton is the mountain's highest peak. It's the most prominent peak in the range. So as a 12-year-old, obviously that was something that I wanted to do with my dad. And we set out, and it took me 2 days. We packed tents. We packed food, climbing ropes, climbing gear, and we summited the Grand Teton and came back down to the Lupin Meadows trailhead the next day. So today, I'm excited to bring you an athlete who has completed this difficult mountain route in a time of 2 hours and 50 minutes and some seconds, 2 hours, 51, I believe. And in doing so, caused one of the biggest controversies in recent trail running history for reasons that we're going to talk about. His name is Michelino Sunseri. Michelino, thank you so much for joining the Tracer Podcast for this discussion.
Stoked to be here, Joey. I'm excited to talk about the training of it, the Grand Teton, and all of it. Thanks for having me on, and thanks for reaching out.
Absolutely. So tell us a little bit about yourself. Where did you grow up, and when and why did you get into running or any endurance sport for that matter?
Yeah. My name Michelino or Mike Sunseri, if that's too many syllables. Okay. I grew up in North Lake Tahoe in Kings Beach, California. So if you're familiar with it, it's known as the Grid. But in the basin of Tahoe there. So, growing up, our backyard was the mountains. Our backyard was trails. We spent so many countless hours of our childhood out in the forest, building forts and carving sticks and, climbing up rocks and, doing all the things that kids should be doing, in my opinion. I had a, fantastic childhood, and I was the youngest, actually, and we had a group of 6 of us in our neighborhood, and we were pretty much always getting into trouble together. And I was the youngest, so it was my job to just try to keep up with the big kids. So I spent a lot of days. They had their bikes, and sometimes I didn't even have a bike, so I was trying to run after them and keep up with all the keep up with Eric, Brian, Colin, Ryan, and my brother Frank. So I guess running started from a young age, man, whether it was running to keep up with the big kids or running away from them because, I did something to bug them or make them upset. But yeah, been playing in the mountains pretty much my entire life. I got into competitive running probably around, 13, 14 years old. We used to have those presidential fitness tests where you had to do push-ups, the pull-ups, the stretching, then the mile run. Which, side note, I don't know why we did away with that. Come on, we should bring back the presidential.
I think the stretching was a little unfair on that thing. You had to stretch like an insane amount, and I couldn't do it.
Right, that was always the hard part because they didn't allow you to warm up either. Like, if you're gonna do the stretch, maybe do it after the mile run.
Yeah.
But anyway, so got into running because of that. One of my teachers, we had the mile run and we did that. And then she was, she's like, man, that was a really good time. Like, you should probably get into running.
Do you remember what your time was on the mile?
I have no idea. Okay. I don't know. I think it was in the 6s, and that was probably in, I don't know, like 5th, 6th grade. That's so 6 something.
Ridiculous time for a 6th grader.
Yeah, it was. I'll have to call her and ask her. I still remember exactly which teacher it was.
Yeah.
But anyways, so yeah, that kind of bled into, first time I actually ran competitively on a team ended up being in 8th grade. So did, cross country and track then. And luckily we had a beautiful trail system right next to our middle school. So, we could go run on the trails for all of our runs. And that kind of translated into high school where, I had an amazing coach, Coach Bill Devine. And he was definitely, one of the most influential people when it comes to my exposure to trail and mountain running. He would organize a lot of our runs with the team to have parents, drive everybody up to, whether it was Mount Rose Meadows or the Flume Trail or so many of these different beautiful high altitude mountain runs. And, we were able to go do that from a young age. And I really, started to gravitate more towards that. And, that led into college. College ran out in Ohio in a small D2 school, Malone University. And, going from the mountains of Tahoe to the concrete jungle of Canton, Ohio, it was definitely, how do you say, unpleasant. It wasn't for me, like I suffered a lot of injuries, a lot of, fatigue and mental, emotional fatigue, just running in the city, running on the complete opposite of trail and mountain running, essentially. So, that didn't really end well. That kind of ruined my relationship with running, to be quite frank. And I actually quit my team my senior year of college, and didn't finish out indoor or outdoor track, or really cross country for that matter. Then took a few years off of trail running, of running in general, and for the most part got into weightlifting, powerlifting, bodybuilding. Put on 60 pounds from the time I graduated college to 2 years later, and then eventually one day realized how much I missed running in the mountains. I was out on an accidental trail run, I'll call it, and went on that trail run. And from that point forward, I think that was about 2017. So took 3 years off from college, and the summer of 2017, started dabbling in it again. And a few years later, 2020, was able to improve, have a lot of fun in the meantime, and then landed my first professional contract with the North Face in 2020. And here we are 5.5 years later, and still running.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's an interesting story. So you needed some healing time, let's call it, after your college experience. How did the weightlifting, and maybe we should save this question for later when we're talking about the training, but maybe just, maybe a short answer here. How did the weightlifting change your aerobic system when you kind of went away from running and went more towards a strength-based sport, and then came back to running? Did you feel great when you started running again? Like, how long did it take you to become a runner again after switching to weightlifting?
I mean, it didn't really take I guess it did take a little while, just because, building up mileage again, feeling good again. And also, I was up to, my racing weight now is about 150 pounds. And when I started back running again, I was 195 pounds. So, I mean, that's a lot of muscle and a lot of body weight to, shift around. I think, all in all, it was only positive. I think, getting the tendons, ligaments, muscles, and everything strong enough to be able to handle the loads of running again. And also just from a, injury resistance and, a strength outlook on it all. One of the reasons I quit and had such a terrible relationship with running is because of all the injuries that just kept adding up, time after time after time. And I think taking a step back and not only rethinking how to approach training, but also just, completely almost having like a total muscular and body makeover in a
Mm-hmm.
sense, to like take myself from, 135 pounds wet in college to 195 and then back to like somewhere in the middle of, being a healthy weight. I think that overall made a massive impact on, my relationship with running and my ability to actually do it without getting hurt. But then also it's bled into my current relationship with running and how I approach training for not only myself, but also my athletes. Um, all in
Yeah.
all, positive. I mean, the weightlifting and strength training, I think, is, it's something that everybody should be doing, especially runners. Um, and having, a few years to focus on that and really, fine tune my, uh, I guess, knowledge and relationship with that aspect of training really, really has helped in the long run.
So you come back to running after this healing period where you were strengthening your body, kind of getting your head back into it, and you find yourself living in Jackson Hole. Am I right? Preparing to you set a goal for yourself to go to set the fastest known time on the Grand Teton. When and why did you make that decision that that was something that you wanted to do?
So the first time I even thought about that, I think was around summer of 2020. I was on a big long training run with one of my buddies, Chris Cloyd, and I let him know, I was like, "Hey, I'm going out to the Tetons to go visit the Tetons, next month or in a couple months." And I'm trying to think of like some fun route. Summer of 2020, FKTs were all the rage. COVID kind of forced us all to into the FKT scene. So yeah, so that's kind of what the goal was. There's no races going on, so I was thinking I need to go do something fun while I'm there. So I brought up the FKT website and looked at the Grand Teton. Go for the big one, go for the gold. So I brought that up, and Chris looks at me and he's like, "Dude," he's like, "that's not just something you go do." He's like, "You're not just gonna show up to the Tetons and go run an FKT on the Grand." He's like, he's like, and of course I had never been there, so being naive and maybe even a little arrogant at the time, for some reason I thought that this was in a good idea, and he convinced me it wasn't. He brought up, we both knew Andy Anderson. Andy lives in the Truckee, California area, and I've been chasing his times since I was a kid. So I knew Andy is a amazing climber, amazing athlete, amazing person, and Chris Cloyd reiterated, like, "Dude, don't do that." So instead, I pivoted. I pivoted to trying to go for the Teton Crest Trail. So we drove out from Tahoe. We're checking out a few different spots, trying to find a new place to land to go live, and the Teton Crest Trail was on the agenda to go run as a FKT route. So I ended up going to run that route. It's a 40-mile route with 9,000 feet of elevation gain from the Phillips Pass trailhead on Teton Pass, and it goes up and over through the heart of the Tetons, past alpine lakes and beautiful cliff formations, all the way up and over into Cascade Canyon, Paintbrush Canyon, down into String Lake where you finish.
Yeah.
So one section of that is you're going through this absolutely gorgeous area of trail called oh my gosh, what? Alaska Basin. So you're going through Alaska Basin, which is this massive plateau up at 9,000 feet, and running through Alaska Basin, you get to this one little spot where I planned on having a pit stop to filter water, redo some hydration and whatnot, and you get to Sunset Lake, and then you start making this climb up to Hurricane Pass and Schoolroom Glacier. And as I'm coming up and over Hurricane Pass up onto the glacier, the Grand, Middle, and South start to rise above the horizon there.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, I get hairs tingling on the back of my neck, and, that full body flush of, getting goosebumps. And, pretty much
And just to point out, like, the Tetons are some of the most explicit. The way one of the old rangers, a friend of my dad's, his name was Rick Reese. He was also a ranger up there back in the 60s with my dad. he described it to me as there's not a lot of mountain ranges in the world that are as explicit as the Grand Teton National Park, meaning it's flat around it, and it's not a very long range. It's not surrounded in foothills. It just shoots up out of nowhere. And I imagine that's what's, causing this reveal as you come around as you come over over the crest there.
Oh yeah. Well, it's having, Grand Middle South, the Alpine Lakes, Cascade Canyon with a beautiful river running through it, all luscious and green, and like everything about it just screamed like, you need to move here. And, literally that was all I really needed to make the decision to not only leave Tahoe and move to the Tetons, but also to put this new goal, on this list of things that I wanted to do. And that goal was, to go for, the fastest known time up and down the Grand Teton.
Yeah. And maybe I'll jump the gun on this question, but there's a long history of amazing record holders on that route. Can you go through some of the highlights there? I'm thinking of one in particular where probably 99% of people who would look at that list and see this person's name would say, yeah, I'm not going to try that if he already did. So who are the previous record holders on the Grand Teton FKT?
So dating all the way back to 1939. Actually, hold on one second. I got something pretty cool I could show you that I have right here. So this is what Andy Anderson ended up signing this one over to me, but essentially it's the belt buckle, right? So they have a belt buckle route for the Grand Teton.
Oh, wow.
And luckily enough in it has the names of
look at that.
Everybody who's done it dating back to 1939.
Yeah, that's amazing.
So we got
sorry to interrupt. Just for people who are listening to this and not watching it on YouTube, if you want to see what he's showing, he's got a box with a belt buckle, and on the back of the box is a list of the fastest known time holders up until Michelino's entry on that list.
So dating all the way back to 1939.
Wow.
Joe Hawks is not the first recorded time up the Grand Teton, but also the first person that we know had the intention of trying to put fastest time up.
Yeah.
So it's what Joe Hawks and John Holyoke, I think, both did it together. But
so read us those years and names off that list there.
So let's see. 1939, Joe Hawks, and he did it in 5 hours and 22 minutes. And then goes into 1973, Jock Glidden, who was actually a Jenny Lake Ranger. And he did it in a time of 4:11. And then the legendary Bryce Thatcher in 1981 ran 3:47. And then Creighton King took it from Bryce 2 years later in 1983 with the time of 3:30. And then Bryce came back and absolutely threw down. I mean, he took 41 minutes off his previous time, and Bryce threw down in 1983 a 3:06. So then Bryce held it for 39 years. So nobody ran faster than 3:06 for 39 years, which actually, caveat to that, we didn't know about this because Andy never reported it. But Andy had actually ran faster than that 3:06. He ran around 3:01 or 3:02 sometime in the I don't know. When he was working as a volunteer, Jenny Lake Ranger, he threw down a fast time, but he was under the impression that that Rollo, another legendary mountain runner in the Tetons, he was under the impression that Rollo had ran it under 3 hours. So Andy never reported his 3:01 or 3:02. So Andy actually did, as far as we know, him or Rollo may have taken it from Bryce from 1983 until 2012, but nobody reported it. So it was kind of one of those, who knows? So Rollo's name should probably be on this list somewhere in between Bryce, Killian, and Andy's name should be on there as well. But anyways, we'll bypass that part of the history of the FKT. But I did want to give Rollo and Andy a big shout out for having unreported fastest known times.
Yeah.
But anyways, from 1983, Bryce Thatcher 306, and then the big Kahuna himself in 2012, Mr. Killian Jornet ended up doing 2 hours and 54 minutes. So he, as far as we know, is the very first person ever to go under 3 hours from the start of the Lupin Meadows trailhead to the top and back down.
Real quick, let me insert something there. When I was just getting into trail running at about that era, maybe 2014, 2015, I would go on YouTube and just look for anything related to trail running. And somehow I came across this video of Killian and Anton Krupicka running the Grand Teton. And it was so captivating to me. A lot of it's because of my childhood and growing up in those mountains and having done the route that they were doing. But there's something about that video, and I'll make sure to post a link to this in our podcast description so that people can see it. But it's a shaky video that's taken by Killian while he chases Anton up and down the mountain. You can hear Killian breathing at times where it's like, wow, he's like really pushing it, because like when you hear Killian Jornet fully breathing, you know that they're moving. And you can see him just blow past other parties that are on the route. But it's such a captivating video. It's got this kind of nostalgic music. The video is grainy and shaky, and it's kind of hypnotizing. And I kind of view it as one of the landmark YouTube videos in trail running. So if you're listening to this, go check out the link and watch that video, because it's just so cool. But my understanding with Killian is that they did that route the day before. He did it with Anton, and that's what that video came from. And then the next day, Killian was like, okay, I'm going to go all out now, and went and set the FKT the next day, which is mind blowing too, because I think they had done it in just over 3 hours on that video. So I don't know if that's true, but that's my understanding of that situation.
It's close enough. I asked Anton those same exact questions.
Yeah. Correct.
So
correct me. What's the real story there?
So I was mostly interested. Like, I was like, yo, Anton, how many times did Killian go up and down this thing? And like, how many like back-to-back days did he do? And it sounds like he did, 5 or 6 laps.
Wow.
And one of, he didn't do nearly as much route finding as I had to do, because it's Killian. But it sounds like he did it that day with Anton, and then the next day did it with Emily, or maybe a day or two after did it with Emily, and then the two of them did the co-ed FKT. And then he did take a couple rest days after that.
Okay.
And then take a couple rest days and then did it again.
Got it.
So I also thought like, oh, he just did it like 4 days in a row and then somehow set the FKT.
Somehow, yeah, that's what I was thinking too.
Yeah, but it does sound like he did have a day or two of rest and all that.
Well, that's good to know. Even Killian has to gear up for something like that, at least a couple days.
Yeah, exactly.
Excellent. Okay, so let's continue with the history then. So who came after Killian?
So Killian gets it on August 12th, 2012. 2 hours, 54 minutes and 1 second. Oh, apologies there. And then 10 days later, Andy Anderson on August 22nd, 2012. Andy Anderson takes 59 seconds off of Killian's time with a 2:53:02.
Wow.
So that was and that was in 2012. So and then I don't think not one person in between 2024 and 2012 was able to go under 3 hours. There was, quite a few attempts from some really strong, awesome athletes. And I don't think anyone broke 3 hours. And yeah.
So let's talk about the route. The route starts at the Lupin Meadows trailhead, just a parking lot, basically, at the base of the mountains where it's flat. It
Mm-hmm.
starts off. Why don't you just go through quickly go through the phases of what it looks like to traverse this route, to climb this route. How does the landscape change? What are the various sections in your mind? What does the route look like?
Sure. So let's see the route all in all. So it starts in Lupin Meadows. It starts out a little bit flat, and then you immediately climb up to call it 1.7 mile junction, and then at that junction, it's all a little technical, kind of buffed out. You hit 1.7 mile junction, and then that immediately goes into this next section that's called the switchbacks. And then the switchbacks takes you from 1.7 miles up to 3 miles in, where it cuts out to, you can go over to Delta Lake, you can go to Amphitheater Lake, Surprise Lake, or you keep going up into Garnett Meadows, up into about the 3.8 miles in. And then about 3.8 miles in, you hit a big old boulder field. And, you go from the switchbacks to the boulders, right? And then the boulders are, more hands on rock. It starts to get route findy. You have to, weave your way in and out of this boulder field.
Yeah.
And from that point, there's a couple different sections where it gets back on trail, then back into the boulders. And then that is about about a 1 kilometer section from the start of the boulders to the meadows. And then once you hit the meadows, you go from the meadows up through Petzold Caves, up to the moraines and the lower saddle.
And that's where it gets significantly steeper, right? Leaving the meadows.
Oh, yeah.
So you come around through that initial boulder field that you referred to at about mile 3 to 4, and you reach what are called the meadows. There's a bunch of campsites there. That's kind of where it's kind of a hub of camping there for various climbs in the Tetons. And then you kind of go straight up a significant climb to the Petzold Caves that are in a new, at this point you're above tree line, and you're kind of on very steep terrain, I would say. Is that how you would describe it?
You hit the meadows at about 4.5 miles,
Okay.
and you're at an elevation of 9,200 feet.
Yeah.
And then from that point forward, you still have 4,500 feet left over the next like 2 miles. 2 miles.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the last, let's see, I got it up in front of me right here. You climb, you climb an extra 4,400 feet over 2.5 miles.
Yeah. So you're going about 2,000 feet a mile there.
Yeah. It starts to get pretty dang steep.
Yeah. You're getting up to that 30, 40 degree, 30 to 40% grade there.
Turns into a hiking race as opposed to a running race at that point.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest parts of that is once you hit the meadows, the established and maintained trail system ends. Right. So from that point forward, from the meadows up to the top of the Grand Teton is essentially, a spider web of trails. You're going, there's just option after option to go right, go left, go straight up, go traverse to the left, whatever.
Right.
It's I've been up and down that thing 45 times now, and I don't think I've ever taken the same route twice. It just turns into kind of a maze, really. It's just a maze of what's the fastest way, what's the correct way, what's the most efficient way.
Yeah. It's very rocky. So any kind of, there is somewhat of a faint trail from what I remember, but there's kind of some obvious lines, but it's so rocky that, as you say, it's a spider web.
Oh yeah. Well, that area holds so much snow that, if there's a big snow year and there's a little extra snow, sometimes, one of the more established trails might be under snow. which causes people to, create a new trail up and over another way. So, I mean,
It's
depending
also
on snow
interesting.
levels.
It's also interesting to think about how that affects an FKT attempt, right? When you've got snow that you could glissade and move a lot faster for a lot less effort versus dry years where you're going to be on pretty technical rocks and boulders.
Oh, totally. Yeah. And I think, as time goes on, I think that, that middle Teton Glacier has gotten smaller and smaller. And, like I know, 2012 when Killian did it, I know he glissaded
Mm-hmm.
down the middle Teton Glacier, as
Yeah,
opposed to,
that's in the video with Anton too. You can see
yeah, yeah,
him
yeah.
go down that snowfield.
Oh yeah. If you haven't seen that video, anyone listening, like go watch it.
Yeah,
It's so cool. It
it
just gives
is.
you goosebumps. It's just such a magical part
It
of ultra
the
running.
music choice too, right? Like just the way, just the emotion it kind of creates when you watch it. I love it. Yeah.
Oh yeah, like OG, like he had like the first GoPro ever made, like
Right.
right. It's just such like it's crappy grainy footage, but it's just magical. It's
Yeah.
it's nostalgic, like you said.
Yeah.
But anyway, so back to the route. Yeah, you hit the meadows, and then you have what did we say, 4,500 feet of climbing left. So it gets real steep. It gets very route findy. It'll take you up through Petzold Caves and up to the moraines, and the moraines bring you onto the lower saddle. And about halfway up the lower saddle, between the lower saddle and the upper saddle, it turns from any type of trail that you could see into 100% scrambling and route finding. There's some faint climber trails that go in different directions, whether it's taking you over to Wall Street or, up around one side of the Black Dike and whatnot. There's, it essentially turns into a scrambling race at that point.
Mm-hmm.
So the last, I don't know exactly, what is it, 2,000-ish feet? The last 1,600 to 2,000 feet is pretty much all, you know, class 5 scrambling.
Yeah. Hands on the rock.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hands on rock. And then if your hands aren't on your rock or aren't on a rock, they're on your knees trying to,
Yeah.
push yourself up and power hike up the mountain.
Right. So to
Um,
summarize, like first 3 to 4 miles, everyday trail runner, no problem. You get to the meadows.
yeah.
The next, I would probably say like the next mile getting to the lower saddle is significantly steep, but it's still trail. It's still hiking. You're not
Yeah.
climbing. The moraine zone you mentioned is very bouldery, large boulders, like boulders the size of small houses. And you're kind of navigating little tunnel, like not necessarily tunnels, but you're kind of going between big boulders and learning routes through just a huge field of boulders. As you get to the lower saddle, from the lower saddle kind of turns back into a little bit of a trail briefly, and then you have a straight up scramble slash climb. Most people who are doing the Grand Teton are roping up once they leave, once they get up to the rock above the lower saddle. I guess in this
Yeah,
case,
and
once they get up
even
to
right
upper saddle.
before, I mean, just to give full transparency and awareness to anyone listening that is interested in doing the Grand Teton, there is a part before you even hit the lower saddle, between the
Mhm.
moraines and the lower saddle, where there's fixed ropes that that the guiding services have put up, and that's essentially where, once you get to that section, if you're comfortable or uncomfortable, if you're uncomfortable at the fixed lines and you don't have gear, it's probably a good place to turn around.
Yeah.
If you're fully comfortable with those fixed lines and scrambling up that section, then yeah, definitely, you can keep moving forward and see, where your turnaround point is. But there are fixed lines right before you get to the lower saddle that are, you know, if that scares you in any sense, you should probably go back
Yeah.
down.
Yeah. As a kid, as a 12-year-old, I got up there, and for some reason the fixed line going into the lower saddle was, there was something wrong with it, or we had to kind of go around something that was in the way. I can't remember, but I found myself out on the rock face, not roped up, just with the fixed line in my hand, but I kind of froze up, and my dad quickly threw a loop of rope and wrapped it around my waist, tied a loop and threw it down to me. So yeah, it starts to get it starts to become a real mountain where serious consequences happen if you were to fall in one of these situations. So that's the route. Now, um, obviously, I mean, one thing that really stands out that I want to point out here is the combination of skills that you need to have in order to set a fastest known time here. You have to be an amazing runner because you're going to be running those switchbacks. They're not steep enough to be walking at that point. Like you can't be hiking. You need to be running. Um, Getting up into the boulders before the meadow, you have to be very technical on your feet because you're no longer on dirt. You're on all kinds of uneven terrain and you need to move quickly through the rocks. Once you get through that, then it turns into really rocky, steep hiking. So now you got to bring another skill set in. And then eventually that has to turn into straight up rock climbing skill. And then, not to mention the descent. Most accidents, most danger happens when we're descending. And you got to come flying down on rock that, if you trip, you're going to go off thousands of feet. I mean, it's a legitimate mountain when you're up there. Navigate your way back down into the rocky sections, traverse the rocky sections back down, and eventually finish this thing out as an all-out trail run, like a flat all-out trail run. So you go out and how many times did you try it before you had the day that you came in at 250? Let me get the time right. 250, 51.
250, but I won't discuss.
Okay. 250. That's easy.
Yeah.
Sorry to shortchange you on the 1 second there. Somebody beat you by 1
Slightly
second. We got to
offended,
get
Joey,
that right.
but it's okay.
Okay. So how many times did that take you? Like, how many attempts did you have?
I never. So the day I did it, that was the first fast attempt I had done.
Wow.
I didn't want to. I wanted to be 100% confident in not only the route finding but also my fitness. So trying to, and the weather. There's so many variables that go into trying to do something like this. I mean, the three biggest being the weather, fitness, and route finding. So having all those things line up is difficult to do. Trying to have yourself peak for a race, essentially, but then hoping that the weather cooperates it leaves a very, very short window of time. But then also even, trying to run and approach a route that inherently has the risk associated with it, you could die. I mean, it's not something that I took very lightly. It's definitely something that a lot of thought, practice, and caution went into. And I did not want to try and do this thing without feeling 100% confident in, not only my fitness, but also my abilities. So that was the first time I've tried to run fast on it. I had done different sections of the route fast, just to play on it and do some time trials, and is going this, taking a left and going up through the Black Rock staircase, or taking a right and going up the bowling alley and through the Eye of the Needle. Like, which one's faster? Or maybe I should go in the middle and take the runner slab.
And
like,
that's the beauty of an FKT is that, or at least this FKT, there's some beauty in it in that you get to decide to some degree, you get to decide your route because you're getting up in the mountain where, hey, if you want to take the Exum Ridge up, then do it if you think that's faster, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's like there's so many different little places where you can play to your own strengths. Mm-hmm. And like, I don't think anyone who's done this FKT or done this route, like I said, I've done it 45 times. And there's no way I've never taken the same route twice. Mm-hmm. It's not only really hard to do that because, there's so many different places you can go, but also, it's also part of it's just checking out the entire mountain, becoming familiar with that rock. becoming familiar with that majestic mountain and going all the different directions to see which one fits you best. And for me, it took myself that long just to have the confidence and the like I said, the confidence, the abilities, and the route finding to actually try to go for it. So
Yeah.
a lot of practice went into it.
I want to take a quick moment and tell you about a product that I think will help you nail your next marathon or ultra marathon. To do well in these events, you have to train correctly. You have to know how to build your endurance, how to build your strength, how to build your speed, your economy. And it's not always obvious how to do that. So what better way to train than to receive daily workout recommendations from people who are winning these races? These are the pros that have been there and done that and have dedicated their lives to understanding how to make the most of your training. That's what Tracer is. Tracer is a new system that brings adaptive, personalized workout recommendations to you through a mobile and web app on a daily basis for a fraction of the cost of traditional one-on-one coaching. So check that out. You can see more. You can learn more about how that works at tracerfitness.com. There's a free 14-day trial, so there's really no risk. You can go in there and play around with the system and decide if it's for you. I personally have used Tracer for preparing for a 50-miler last year, my first 100-miler this last fall, and recently a ski mountaineering race. And in all three of those events, I exceeded the goals that I had for myself and did extremely well. So check it out, tracerfitness.com. So you spent many, many days navigating, learning, building your fitness, learning, what needed to happen on race day. But it really was your first all-out go when you set the record, which is amazing. That's fascinating. Okay, so you set this record, 250-50. You come back to the trailhead. There's a photo, an epic photo of you on your knees at the Lupin Meadows trailhead by the sign. And you had done it. You had set 250. And there started one of trail running's biggest controversies. And that is that in the switchback section, there is a trail that does not follow the first switchback. It kind of comes into it. So explain where the controversy happened and what did, because you weren't trying to hide anything. Your Strava went up. It showed your exact route. You didn't edit anything. It was all public. So why did a controversy start around the validity of your fastest known time?
Sure. So I guess it goes back to that exact trail in question. And I think the controversy probably started because of the write-up that I made. I made some choice words, put some choice words in there and, said some things that probably, maybe could have been looked at under a microscope a little bit better by myself. But essentially the controversy lies within this old climbers trail, which goes by a couple different names. We found out, we got the name of the old climbers trail, essentially coined by Bryce Thatcher, record holder from, in 1981 and 1983 until 2012. So he referred to that trail as the old climbers trail. And then we've actually uncovered through discoveries, through through discovery, through the legal process, we actually discovered that there are some rangers who referred to this trail as the Willie Unsold Trail, which is really interesting, and that was pretty cool to find out. That's a really cool historical nugget right there. Willie Unsold is a famous American mountaineer who I want to say he died around 1968, 1969 or so. He died up in the mountains. But he spent time guiding and living. I don't know if he was guiding, but I know he was in the Tetons for, in the 40s and the 50s, playing in the range there. So it was kind of a cool little nugget to see it referred to as something other than the Old Climbers Trail as well.
So on the way up, you took the switchbacks
Right.
to get to the meadows. That's within the first 3 or 4 miles. So you're talking at about mile 3 somewhere. So on the way up, you took the route, just the switchback, the normal route. On the way down, where the switchbacks start on the way down, you took, I'm going to call it the Old Climbers Trail, which is a more direct route to it. Basically, if there's, I believe there's like 5 or 6 switchbacks on that trail. It basically cuts out that first one. It just kind of goes straight down to the fourth switchback rather than the sixth. Can you describe what that trail actually looks like? Like, is it?
Yeah.
It's a trail. So,
Oh
like,
yeah.
yeah, like what does it look like?
It's a trail. It looks like any other single track trail that, if you're out in the mountains, pretty much anywhere. It's a hard packed, well established trail. I mean,
Okay.
it's definitely steeper than other trails. I mean, depending on who you ask or who, where you're running, but I wouldn't even call it the steepest part of that route. I would call it somewhere in the medium, somewhere you know, in the middle of, easy to steep difficulty rating.
Okay.
But yeah,
So,
you're pretty spot on. It really just goes from that Garnet Meadows trail down over to that Amphitheater Lake Trail,
yeah.
and really just circumnavigates one tiny little switchback and then one of the big longer ones.
Yeah.
It's the most logical direct route up and
Right.
down the mountain.
Yeah.
Um,
I remember seeing it as a kid when I climbed. I remember that being there. So you take this on the way down. You don't take it on the way up, but you take it on the way down, and you put it on Strava. You have some words in your Strava. You described it as maybe you should have been a little more careful. What did you say that got somebody's attention? That the controversy sparked because the park rangers, I'm going to say, I mean, is it the rangers, didn't like the fact that you had taken this trail?
yeah. So I think one of the things I did say in that write up was, if I had to make this choice to take this trail again, I 100% would do it again.
Okay. And
That
that set them off. That
I
and the
think
con
that, as well as like like taking that trail. I did have a part of me was thinking to take the way that Andy took out of the fact that Andy's previous FKT had used that other trail. However, he is the first person since 1939, men's and women's side, that did take the long way down as opposed to the most direct route.
Okay, so out of the list that you read us, that's on the back of that belt buckle, there's seven or eight people on that. I think you're
Yeah,
saying every one of those except for Andy took the Old Climbers Trail on the way down.
correct. And some of them on the way up as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Some on the way up. That's
and
that's
and on the women's side too. The current. Well, now we don't even know who the women's FKT holder is at this point, because after Outside Magazine or FKT website, whatever you want to call it, after they decided to flag all the routes, they flagged the women's FKTs too. So now nobody really knows who the women's
right.
FKT holder is.
Right.
I'm pretty sure I have a hunch who has it, but
When you
yeah.
say they flagged it, you're referring to fastestknowntime.com.
Correct. Yeah,
And
they've
and is fat
retroactively.
Yeah, is that organization just a private, from what I understand, it's just an LLC, it's just a company that has a domain and decided to make themselves kind of the go-to for listing these kinds of things.
Right. So I mean, Buzz Burrell created FKT back in, I don't know exactly when, but it used to be just a forum with,
Yeah.
athlete driven records and times, and the athletes were the ones who essentially owned it, being a forum. But he ended up selling it to Outside Magazine. So Outside Magazine actually owns Fastest Known Time
Okay.
now, and there's moderators throughout the United States, and probably throughout the world, I would say, maybe,
Yeah.
that moderate these FKTs, and
Uh,
I think they're all volunteers. Like, I don't think anybody's getting paid for it.
yeah.
But yeah.
Okay. So to paint the picture here, you go run the route, you come down the old climbers trail. Um, the park, the rangers in the park have somewhat made this trail taboo over the years.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if you can call it illegal, but they have made it taboo. There's a small sign on the top that says uh, closed for restoration or something. That's been there since I did it as a 12-year-old. Down below, there's another one that says on the bottom side of it, it says shortcutting causes erosion.
Yeah.
And the
So flip
sign is
flip those two. The bottom sign says closed for
close. Okay.
regrowth,
Yeah.
and it's like a sign kind of behind a pine tree. You can't really even see it from the
It's
main
kind of out
trail.
of the way. Yeah.
It's kind of out of the way, and the top says shortcutting causes erosion,
Yeah.
and it's yeah.
And they're small. From what I remember, it's a small black plaque that has kind of debossed letters on it on like a small iron post.
Yeah.
And so it's somewhat of a like the way I would describe it is it's taboo, and yet it's been used, and it's been used by rangers over the years. It's been used by clearly it's not grown back in, and that sign's been up for how many decades now? Maybe 50 years.
Yeah,
I don't know when those signs got put up.
it's been supposedly allegedly closed for regrowth for almost 50 years now.
Right, right. Okay, so you take this. So the rangers are sensitive to this trail for some reason, and to give them credit, the rangers deal with a lot of people in the park. When I was a 12-year-old, there were we could go to the meadows and camp, we could go to the saddle and camp, and now everyone in the world knows about the Grand Teton National Park. We have visitors from all over the world touring the park. So the rangers are under a lot of stress when it comes to trying to preserve the park, trying to keep people out of, who knows what. I'm sure they deal with all kinds of stuff. You come down, you just set the fastest known time. You took the taboo trail. It gets out on Strava. You're being a little bit belligerent in your words, saying, I'd take that every time. And they react to that, and it becomes a gunfight. And they decide they're going to take you to court, and they do. And they're, from my understanding, they were seeking a number of penalties. They were seeking banning you from the park for 5 years, fining you $5,000, and potentially serving prison time for 6 months. Did I get that right?
Spot on. Yeah.
Okay. So they are super upset about this.
Yeah.
And you just finished the trial. So what's the status of the trial?
Status right now, we're still waiting on a verdict. Let's see, we had a 2-day trial with over 20 federal employees there. We had, I think there was about 8 rangers and marshals tacked out in full tactical gear with guns, and it was a pretty egregious show of force. So we had our 2-day trial on May 20th. Right now, as we're recording, it's June 11th. So we've been waiting almost coming up on 4 weeks now for a verdict. The judge preferred to have a written opinion on the verdict. So we're still waiting. However, quite some things have actually happened since the end of the trial. Really, really, really hoping that we don't have to go to trial again. There is a very slight possibility that with the reintroduction of new evidence that was withheld from the prosecutor, that we may have to try this again. However, I do think if that does happen, it might just be dismissed.
And what evidence was withheld?
So we found out through a FOIA request, Freedom of Information Act request, which anyone can file if you're trying to get any type of any type of public or government records. So we found out through a FOIA request that the day before trial, the deputy director of the National Park Service, Frank Lands, had reached out and told the prosecutor, told Ariel Combs and Nicole Ramini, the Department of Justice employees in Wyoming, that they thought the 5-year ban that was offered is over criminalization, and they also believed that the whole I'm not reading through the lines, reading through it here, it seems as if they thought the whole thing was a little bit overdone. So they withdrew their support of pressing charges, and they did that directly with the prosecutor, but then she never disclosed that information to us. And instead of disclosing that information, she extended a plea deal that was pretty much just a big slap in the face. It was the kind of plea deal that no rational person would ever take. So of course we said no, and then ended up going to trial and having to do the 2-day trial.
So you're waiting for a verdict, and that will dictate legally what happens here. Which then the second question is, well, what about the fastest known time itself? And there's another legal process going on there, and it's not as explicit as our court system, but there is kind of this question now of, is your fastest known time valid? And to that, I would point out the list of people that you have. I'm aware that Killian took the same trail. I don't know about the others, but from my understanding, as you said, is that everyone but one took the Old Climbers Trail, at least on the way down. Above that, terrain is technical and varied enough that it somewhat doesn't matter. But is there any update on? I mean, whose job is it to ratify this fastest known time? I mean, we could look to fastestknowntime.com, who has their own, they're owned by outside, and they have their own incentives and things that may cause them to accept it or not. I know that they did reject it during the trial. Has that changed with fastest known time? Are they reconsidering that?
I haven't spoken with anybody from fastest known time. I have a hard time believing that they would, even if I'm found not guilty, I have a hard time believing they would accept it. But at the end of the day, it's not up to them. They're, what they say is the fastest known time at this point for that mountain doesn't really matter. I mean, they kind of went back and destroyed the entire history of the mountain. They destroyed the history of the records on that mountain by flagging everybody who's ever done it. And it's not necessarily up to them. I mean, I think the previous model of having these records be held by the people and by the athletes, and not necessarily this arbitrary governing board. I don't believe that. I mean, regardless of what they say, and I think the person to ask would be Andy Anderson, and, I talked to Andy the day of the FKT on September 2nd. And, I told him, I was like, hey, just so you know, like I did take the Old Climbers Trail to get this FKT. And his answer, he didn't care at all. His answer was he didn't really care. So I mean, if Andy's willing, able, and happy to sign over the belt buckle and be supportive of me, I think it kind of makes some cracks and fissures in the entire FKT model and their entire website. as well as specifically this mountain. And I think it's one thing too. I mean, over time, what's going to happen is there's going to be more visitors to these mountains. There's going to be more people going for these FKTs. And, due to things that we can't control, whether it's erosion, whether it's trees falling down, whether it's mudslides, whether it's, nature being nature, these routes are going to change, and unfortunately, we're not going to have much control over that. They're going to also change due to human caused reasons, whether it's, I know Pfeiffer Horn here in Salt Lake City, that FKT, I know they added, some big, long, major switchback after, was it Noah Brodigam has the FKT for that one. And now I know, since he did that, I'm pretty sure the route's almost a half mile longer now. So, I mean, it kind of stinks because the model for FKT and like having these time tested routes that have, it's like the whole argument with, tearing down statues, it's like, do we want to remember our history for one thing or another? And it's an interesting thing to think about because now it is that premise, but in our world of running and in the outdoors. And I don't really know what we do about this, to be quite frank, because the courses are going to change, the routes are going to change, and the times are not going to be able to reflect history. They're not going to be able to reflect what you can do now on a current trail if we keep, changing these things around. So it kind of sucks because I think it kind of ruins the entire model of what FKTs even are.
Yeah, there's by nature with an FKT, one of the beauties in an FKT is that you can make up an FKT for whatever you want. I could go start one now and say, first thing you have to do is drink a glass of orange juice, then start at my doorstep, run around my block 3 times, go up the street, tag the top of the mountain, back down, drink another glass of orange juice, and then it's done. And I can describe the route and say, hey, that's what I did. And I want to see if anybody can beat me, right?
The Joey Tropicana FKT.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's the next big thing. But yeah, so that's the beauty of an FKT is that nobody has to organize a race for you. You can do it whenever you want. And as long as you're articulate in how you spell the route, and as long as there's an understanding of what's expected, then go do it or don't. And if people want to set up a FKT for anything, they can do it. And so you're absolutely right in the sense that the ethos and the originators of the FKT somewhat describe what the challenge is, and that will change over time. Well, it's an amazing accomplishment either way, whether you want to look at it legally. I'm not here to say whether that was legal or not. I'm not here to say whether somebody listening to this should accept your FKT, whether they should be upset with you, whether they should be on your side. That's for everybody to kind of decide based on the facts that they know. But what is certain in my mind is that this was an amazing athletic achievement. And I want to shift gears here. We've been going for an hour, and yet we're really just kind of getting started here on how you trained for this, which is a whole story in its own. So what did your training look like going into this FKT?
So I tried to look at this FKT as kind of the same way I actually look at strength training, right? So when you're approaching a strength training program, you want to be specific to what your goals are and to what you're trying to accomplish. Strength is specific, right? So I took that same exact mentality into going for this FKT, the specificity of what's needed in order to accomplish a goal like that and a time like that. And in my mind, what I came up with was you have to be able to run quickly and efficiently for the runnable sections because, what's the exact equation? I think, over about 42 minutes, the first 42 minutes is very runnable. And then the last 22 to 24 minutes is also extremely runnable, right? So that's an hour and 7 minutes of this FKT that's runnable, right? So that leaves us with an extra hour and 45 minutes that's non-runnable terrain. So the majority of this FKT and the majority of this route is in terrain that isn't going to be runnable terrain. It's going to be efficiency, strength, and movement up high. So I tried to break that down into my training to reflect that exact thing. So what I wanted to do was make sure that I was in a place where I had a huge aerobic base, because you can't do any of these races or FKTs without having an aerobic base. But then the specific training, I wanted to make sure I was doing that in places where I'm either hiking, scrambling, or, quote unquote, kind of running up high at altitude. So what I did is I put together a plan that spent a lot of long days up high, moving through, class 4, class 5 scrambling terrain up high at altitude, and then trying to combine that with, short time trials up high as well. But then also coming down and doing workouts at low altitude down at, 6,000, 6,200 feet down in the valley, to try to work on turnover and speed. So the things I focused on for this specific thing, and I'll put them in order of what I think is important. The top of the list is movement up high, right? Being able to move consistently and efficiently at altitude. That was the most important thing for me. And that comes, in my mind, that comes in the form of strength. So kind of having like this strength base for being able to move that high. So doing that. And then next was hill sprints and uphill efficiency. So trying to maximize how many times I'm doing hill sprints each week. And then everything underneath that is going to be the hour and 7 minutes that is spent doing runnable terrain. Right. So I really didn't do too much speed work per se. Most of it was trying to be specific for the event and for the goal at hand.
So let me dive into that a little bit and get some particulars there.
Cool.
You mentioned aerobic base. So your approach to your aerobic base was a specific form of aerobic base, spending long days in the mountains, but staying aerobic. Did I get that right? So you were trying to do these very long efforts. Like, how many hours are we talking for like an easy long day in the mountains? What did that look like? How many hours?
Sure. So I'm pulling up my training log right now. I was, for the most part, I spent a lot of June, I was coming off a little Achilles injury. So I was spending mostly like 20 to 30 hours a week on the bike. So June was a lot of 20, 30 hour weeks on the bike. And then that, once the Achilles was feeling better through PT, that moved and switched into, in July, a lot of long days up high hiking, 16 hours hiking / running, 16 and a half hours, 21 hours, 26 hours, 26 hours
per week.
Per week.
So, and you were, and those were you were trying to stay completely aerobic in those.
Those were, I would say 85-90% of that was all zone 1, zone 2.
Yeah. Okay. So a huge amount of mountain movement, let's call it. You're up in the rocks, you're kind of stepping on uneven terrain, you're climbing, you're scrambling, you're running a little bit, but it's like laps around, like traversing through Teton peaks, basically at metabolically an easy pace.
Correct.
Were you fueling those easy runs? Were you like,
oh yeah.
So doing a high amount of carbs during your training?
Yeah. So one of the best tips I got from Andy, and Andy was extremely helpful in, the preparation for this, and, bouncing questions off him of how did he train for this, and, what did he think was a good idea. So one of the most important things he had done leading up to this was he was a Rocky Mountain National Park ranger, and he spent a lot of days up high with a big heavy pack on. scrambling around, moving around on rocks. And that for me meant, putting my running pack on and spending long days out with, excessive amounts of water. I would bring a lot of water, a lot of carbs, a lot of snacks to purposely try to weigh myself down for that movement up high. Because like I said, I believe that the way to moving efficiently that high at altitude isn't through speed, it's through strength. And it's through that aerobic base, and it's through spending a lot of time moving in that terrain, with heavy weight on it. So a lot of fueling, a lot of water, and a lot of extra weight.
That's fascinating. A lot of people believe that weighing yourself down is counterproductive because they say, well, why don't you just move faster to get like say your heart rate's at the top of your aerobic zone, and then you weigh yourself down and you can reach that top of your aerobic zone at a slower pace because you're carrying, let's say, 20 extra pounds of water or something. And they would say, well, that's not going to help you. You might as well dump the water out, leave the weight at home, and move faster and just get yourself to that metabolic zone by moving quicker. You're saying you don't buy that. You're saying that the actual muscle strength was key in this for you.
I think that theory holds true at lower altitudes. However, once you start mixing, the lack of oxygen into the equation, then it's not necessarily, once you get up that high, your efficiency is going to suffer anyways, because you don't have the capability there's just not enough oxygen in the atmosphere to move that efficiently. So my thought process was, okay, well, I'm not going to be able to be as efficient from a speed standpoint up there. So I should have the muscular strength to be able to do that. I can work on the speed down low, and I can work on the speed and the turnover down at 6,000 feet. Because once you get up high anyways, your heart rate's not going to beat as rapidly and as heavily as it will down at low altitude. So training the efficiency that high it just doesn't really make sense, I don't think, from a standpoint of the amount of oxygen available in the atmosphere. And like, you just can't really, the difference in how quickly you're going to move that high, I don't think it has anything to do with the amount of weight you're bringing up there. It does, yes. But when you're training to run fast and light, your efficiency won't take a hit from building strength at that high of an altitude.
Do you think so the top of the Grand Teton is 13,700, I believe, 13,700 feet. If the top of the Grand Teton was 7,000 feet, 8,000 feet, would you have trained differently?
Oh yeah, 100%.
So you tailored this effort completely. Your training program going into it was 100% around optimizing your ability to move quickly on technical terrain at altitude. And the altitude was the key ingredient here, the specificity of that.
100%. Yeah. That's like I said, I think I look at training as being very specific to what your goals are. Strength is specific, training is specific, taking all those different variables into account and then creating your training program based off of those variables and what you're going to need in order to achieve that goal is paramount to success.
What you mentioned doing a lot of hill repeat hill sprints. How long are those hill sprints? What does that look like?
I average around 15 seconds,
Okay.
Full voluntary muscle recruitment for 15 seconds with maximum rest time.
On technical terrain or on something like a steep road so that you can get more power without worrying about the technicality, or on the technical?
So for those specifically, I avoided technical terrain for those because the goal was maximum power output.
Okay. So, and how many, give us a workout. What does a hill sprint workout look like for you?
For like a maintenance hill sprint workout, once a week doing 6 to 8 15-second repeats with 2 minutes rest. And then, the closer you get to race time, trying to work more on like a lactate clearance style of hill repeats,
Mm-hmm.
which are going to increase the time of the hill repeats, but then decrease the rest, right? So
Mm.
that would lead into, a 1-to-1 rest to work ratio, and trying to stimulate that lactate clearance mechanism,
Okay.
and avoid, that's not necessarily for muscle, maximum voluntary muscle recruitment. That's more so for a metabolic effect as opposed to a muscular
Yeah.
effect.
Whereas, so what you're saying is in the beginning, you're doing these 15-second hill repeats, and they're very much a muscular adaptation. They're a neurological / strength based exercise. You're going all out. It puts a huge amount of tension in your muscles. And it's not really about lactate. It's not really about oxygen. It's just about the muscular specificity of launching those muscles. As you get closer to race day, you started to blend those into a more metabolic workout, which really was geared towards building up lactate and clearing the lactate, utilizing lactate. Um, but I'm curious about this form of training with the hill sprints. What do you think the key benefit, like what's the difference between going out there and doing 15-second hill sprints and having that be a stimulus to your muscles, not your metabolic system, versus if I just go pick up some weights and do some calf raises and do some squats, like that kind of like uh, how do you think those differ in the effects that they will have on you as a trail runner?
So I would say that the hill sprints are more, biomechanically efficient to what we're actually training for. Um, Doing that, and the point of doing the hill sprints is to generate power, to build strength and power in uphill running form. And there's nothing in the world you can do to help build up those muscle patterns and neurological patterns than doing the thing. Like you got to do the thing to get better at the thing. Being in the gym, like the way I talk about hill sprints with my athletes is, if you're a power lifter in the gym doing back squats, you're doing 5x5 reps of like heavy back squats. That's what hill sprints is for running, right? So you're generating maximum power by running, sprinting uphill, and then taking long rest periods just like you would with the 5x5 back squats, and then doing it again. The point of doing the hill sprints is to maximize power output and efficiency moving uphill. And once you get better at doing that on that higher end of thing, and that higher output of movement, then the everyday just jogging uphill is going to feel easier. If you can increase your squat rep, your back squat rep from 350 pounds to 500 pounds, then that 200-pound maintenance squats are going to feel really easy. And that's like some freakish lifting standards right there. I'm just throwing numbers out. But it's the not only raising the ceiling, but raising the floor with the ceiling, right? So that's kind of the whole idea, in my opinion,
Yeah.
behind the hill sprints.
As a coach, you're an ongoing coach, an active coach in the sport now. As a coach, do you recommend 15-second hill sprints weekly for any runner, for any trail runner?
I think periodization is important. I do have most of my athletes doing hill sprints, depending on timing, what they're training for. Yes, I mean everybody's different. I'm not blanket across everybody doing hill sprints all the time. But if I'm coaching you and you're running trails or mountains, you best believe that at some point you're going to be doing hill sprints.
Right. Right. And how do you feel? Do the hill sprints in your mind not only stimulate uphill economy, let's call it, do you feel like it also is a stimulus for muscular endurance on an uphill where you're able to run longer at the same speed without fatiguing because you've pushed your muscles to the max?
Oh, 100%. I mean, it's the same. Like I said, it's raising the ceiling so that we can raise the floor with it.
Mm-hmm.
It's if you're able to increase your power and strength output in a short period of time on a hill, your efficiency therefore should be climbing at the same, maybe not the same exact 1-to-1 ratio, but your efficiency will also become better just by building up that power, building up those neurological patterns.
What about downhill? Obviously, coming down off the Grand Teton, I believe there's like 7,000 feet round trip that you have to come down. And a lot of that very steep. So, what did you do to season your quads and to be ready for the impact that just the downhill was going to give you, so that by the time you hit the runnable trail, you're not losing speed there. Your muscles are still ready.
I really didn't focus too much on that because if in any type of training plan, if you're putting in any type of significant vertical, your quads will get used to it. Your quads will be okay. There are definitely, I mean, I guess I'm lying actually. Looking back at training, I mean, I did have some, quite a few different efforts that were, downhill focused. Um, I do think the overall volume of increasing time spent uphill, downhill, 10,000, 12,000, 16, 20,000 feet of vertical climbing a week, that's going to help your legs get used to it. Running fast downhill and being able to perform in a quicker, more dynamic way, I did put certain landmarks into my training to kind of slowly build up to 7,000 feet of hard downhill. And, it started with a fun video I made with Anna Gibson, who's a, quickly ascending trail runner in the United States and the world.
She just won
awesome.
The mountain championships, I believe, on the East Coast, right?
Yeah, she did.
Mm-hmm.
And what, a week after Zagama. So she's pretty cool.
Yep.
So we did a fun little video. We did a hard up down on Mount Glory. So we started there, 1,700 feet of hard up followed by a hard down. And then, take that. And then I put that into, the next one, recover. Downhills take quite some time to recover from, as we all know.
Mm-hmm.
They beat up the quads in a way that nothing really can. So then take that, then move into Taylor Mountain, which is another, 33% average grade over 1.7 miles. So 3,200 feet up that, and then, hard, and then turn around and come down hard again. So like little landmark things that, slowly building up to that. And the reason why, I want to work these hard downhills in right after a hard uphill is because you're going to get to the top of one of these big hills if you're working hard, and you don't want to turn around and run down hard. Like, of course you don't. Like, you're tired, you're exhausted. Your quads and your entire posterior chain has just been working overtime to get you up here, and turning around and running down hard is the last thing you want to do. But from a training from a training standpoint, it's exactly what you need to do in order to try to go for, fastest known times and races that are going to be up down mountain races, So working small versions of this attempt, being, like I said, being very specific about it, and working those in as kind of a stepping stone up to the big goal.
Yeah, it's very much in line with, I'm thinking in particular of a tracer program that we have. And for those of you who are listening, what's a tracer program? Tracer is an app that it basically adaptively gives you workout recommendations from pros. And one of our programs is the higher running program. We have a higher running 50K and a higher running 100K. That's Sage Candidate and Sandy Nypaver's programs. And those have what they call an up down workout in them. And it's a very exotic workout because it only gets applied on a going into a goal. People only get this in their tracer program recommended on a particular day, like once or twice going into race day. And yet there's tons of threshold running. There's tons of, hill repeats on the uphill, but the up down is used very sparingly. And it goes right in line with what you're saying. And I think maybe the takeaway for people to learn here is that it was almost an afterthought for you, because I asked the question, well, what did you do for downhill? And your first answer was, well, I didn't really focus on it. And then you kind of backed off and said, well, wait, yes, I did. But you kind of sprinkled in a few workouts, whereas the base of your training was very uphill centric. And I think there's something to be learned there, that you don't need to go out and hammer yourself on downhills, because when you do, there's going to be a high recovery cost, and you're going to blow a hole in your calendar every time you do that, right? You're not going to be able to train the same if you give yourself a too much downhill stimulus. And I've heard this from many coaches. Yes, you need the downhill stimulus, but apply it wisely, because if you overdo it, I mean, personal story here, hilarious. Okay. There's a race called the Wasatch Steeplechase, and they no longer do it. It's in Salt Lake City, has a long history, but the trail kind of got changed, and I don't think they're not doing the race anymore. But back in the day when I was like my first couple of years of doing it, I watched a video of Killian online, and he had said he's just trying to get as much vert as he can leading into the race. Well, I interpreted that as like the week of the race. So Joey, the complete noob, was slamming downhills on Wednesday when his race was on Saturday. And needless to say, I had some really terrible Wasatch Steeplechase races, because I was blowing my quads out all week leading into race day.
Nope.
Yeah. I've made every mistake there is to make in trail running, which leads me to my next question for you, and that is, what is something you got wrong? You've been running for a long time. You're a coach. You've gone from Presidential Fitness Award and running in Tahoe with your friends and keeping up with them on their bikes, to setting the fastest known time on the Grand Teton. There's got to be mistakes. What are some of those counterintuitive mistakes that you could share with our audience, that are things that maybe they hear you say and they say, I'm doing that right now, and I should stop and maybe reconsider it?
I think the first thing that comes to mind is really training too much, overdoing it on the volume. I mean, you kind of alluded to it too. Like, you thought, you had to do all this extrovert to get ready for this race. I think it's in this day and age where everybody has a Strava, whether or not they're public or not. It's almost as if we compare and contrast ourselves to others. And a lot of people become slaves to the numbers. You become slaves to the graph on your Strava that says, whether or not you're running as much as your competitors. I think overtraining and overdoing it without any type of specific goal in mind, just to, mileage is mileage. I mean, if that's your goal, that's great. Like if your goal is to just run as much as you possibly can, I mean, go for it, do it. But if you have more specific goals, I think having the ability to tell yourself when enough is enough is a really hard goal, and it's a really hard thing. It takes years and years of experience to learn about your own body. So I would say that's number one. The biggest training mistake I don't know if I'm a veteran in this sport at this point. I feel like I am, turning 33 in 2 weeks here. And, I've been racing for a really long time. But one thing I've noticed is, over the time of being in this sport, I've seen so many guys that are, slaves to running 100, 120 miles a week and, forcing themselves to run this far and, get all the Strava crowns and, run hard, hard, hard. And a lot of those guys aren't around anymore. Like people break. And just because, especially to the younger athletes, if anyone's listening, don't overdo it on the volume. Caleb Olson just had a great Substack write up last week talking about how, he's not looking to this year. He's looking 4 years down the road and making training decisions now that are going to be positive for him 4 years down the road. And I think that's the way that everyone should be looking at running or coaching and training in this world of running. If you're trying to just be a flash in the pan, go for it. Go run 120, 140 miles a week. We can't all be Jeff McGavro. Jeff McGavro is indestructible. Like the dude's got, quads of steel. I don't understand it, but he's a very rare exception, like don't fall into the trap of more is always better, because it's not. So that's number one, definitely.
Let me ask a follow up on that. Our audience is going to be largely amateur runners. They're going to be the Joey Wilsons of the world. We want to do our best. We enjoy the sport. We enjoy the process of getting better at it. We enjoy racing ourselves. We're not going to beat Michelino and Caleb Olson and whoever else and Killian. We know that. And yet we want to do better. As amateurs, we don't run high volume just by nature of what, we have day jobs and we do other things. We're investing our time in other places in our lives. So it's always been this balance of like, how do you truly know whether you're going too much? I think we know when we're going too hard, right? Easy days should be easy. And I think most people are starting to understand that. But volume is always kind of a trap, because it always feels like if you go easy enough, you should be able to accumulate more volume. And for me, a 70-mile week would be high volume. A low volume week for me might be 30 to 40 hours. So how does an amateur, not a pro, going from 120 miles down to 80, how does an amateur, let's give some decision metrics to people so that they can evaluate and say, I'm not going to run today, or I'm only going to run for a half an hour when I was thinking 90 minutes.
Yeah, I think some very important metrics you can keep track of. Number one, first and foremost, is sleep. Is your sleep suffering because maybe you're doing too much? Are you having restless nights because, life and training, we have different stressors in every single area of training, whether it's work, family, your training overall. Like there's all these different things that you have an accumulative stress. And if you wake up, feeling exhausted, you wake up an hour earlier than normal, you can't go to sleep, your hormones are all out of whack, like something's got to give. The accumulative battery, everything weighs into it. And the number one thing I would say is sleep, right? Sleep and stress. If you're having issues with those two things, then taking the training down a notch for a week or two and letting everything kind of balance back out, and getting back to the point where you're feeling energized and refreshed and want to go for a run. Like if you're feeling dreadful about having to wake up tomorrow morning to go for your run, maybe it's time to take a day off.
Right.
There's, like I said, being a slave to the numbers isn't always a good thing. There's also times in training when you're going to, it's going to be crunch time. You're going through, one of your biggest volume blocks, and you're going to feel tired and you're going to, be exhausted. And knowing the difference between towing the line and going over the line is something that we all learn eventually. It's not just a trait that we all have inherently. It's a learned trait, and it takes time and experience. And I guess that's a long-winded answer to that question. But tracking your sleep, making sure you're getting good sleep, good recovery, your energy levels throughout the day, your your desire. I think that matters
Mm,
quite a bit. Um, if it's Thursday and you're feeling exhausted, you have a long run on Saturday or long run on Sunday, and you're supposed to put in a workout Friday, but you're feeling totally exhausted on Thursday. You're training for a 50K. I'm gonna have my athletes, skip that workout and be like, you know what? Maybe just get out for, easy 30-minute hike, easy 30-minute run. Like, let's skip the workout. Let's give you an extra day, and let's emphasize the long run that we want to do, because the long run is going to be more specific to the goal in the end than this threshold workout in the middle of the week.
right.
And if you're already feeling exhausted, I don't want to put you at any type of injury risk or any type of risk that's going to take away from the bigger picture.
So this last week, last Tuesday, I went out for a run early morning, 5:30 a.m. Went out, felt great. Just legs felt bouncy, heart rate was low, moving really well, and great. Had a great run. Would have rated it A. Wish I could feel that way every day. The very next morning, I got up again at 5:30, so it kind of stacked 2 nights of poor sleep. I went up at higher elevation. Went up Big Cottonwood Canyon just out of Salt Lake. Got on a trail, and my friends were gone immediately, and I could not move my legs. They were burning. My heart rate wasn't very high, but you could feel the weakness throughout my body. And that continued Thursday, Friday, and even into Saturday. And I just didn't run for 4 days. And in the back of my mind, it's like, I'm losing all this fitness, but I can tell something's off. And in hindsight, I think it was not only the lack of sleep, but I was fighting a virus. And even things like mental cues, like on Saturday, my son was gone, my wife's out of town, and I'm like in the garage working on something, and I'm getting upset at everything, right? Like I can tell that I'm irritable, and
Yeah.
I'm getting annoyed at and there's no one to blame it on but myself, right? Because I'm just by myself. And I realized that, like, yeah, something's really off, and even took Sunday off. And then finally Monday got back on the horse, got on my treadmill and checked my heart rate and my power output. And guess what? I didn't lose anything. So I think there's something to be learned there, to following your advice and just truly listening, and sometimes trusting yourself and just saying, you know, I can tell this isn't my normal pattern, and I need to back off. In Tracer, what we've tried to do is give people that question front and center on the user interface. So it's like you go into a day, it says you've got a key workout today, and you go and you're like, I feel really tired today. I feel really sore today. I feel like I've got like an injury coming on. You click those buttons, and the program adjusts for that exact reason. Okay, so anything else you can think of mistakes? So overdoing it is a key mistake. Anything else that along the way that you felt like has been a big takeaway of a mistake you've made and corrected along the way?
Yeah, one of the biggest mistakes I think I've made was neglecting the strength training. I had a long period of time where I was spending a lot of time in the gym, and then I took 2-3-ish years kind of away from that, and was really intense on the running volume. And that's when I started noticing things breaking down, more tendon injuries, not having the tendon strength and elasticity to be able to support the amount of volume I wanted to run, because I wasn't taking the time to train those tendons, to train the strength to be able to support that running. That's one of the other big things that I think personally was something that I should have spent a little more time on. And if you look at my training logs now, the overall running volume has come down. Things have been way more specific, but then the strength training portion of it has gotten back to where it used to be. And I think as any, like I said, I'm 33, so I still think my best years of running are ahead of me. But using what I've learned to have this solid foundation of what I need to know for what's up ahead, I would say that the strength training is absolutely essential.
How did you balance strength training going into the Grand Teton FKT because you're doing all of this you're doing 20, 30 hours of work a week, which is a huge amount. Like swimmers do 30 hours, right? Cyclists do 20 plus hours. Runners rarely do 20 plus hours. So, uh,
So
so
caveat there is
yeah.
when I say those numbers, the strength training is included in that.
Okay.
It's
Okay.
not 30 hours of running a week.
Even if
I
you're running 20 hours a week and doing 5 hours of strength training, it's a lot, right?
True.
So, I mean, maybe there's like, I want to push you on this because on the one hand, you're saying don't overdo it. And yet one of your biggest achievements as a pro runner came after doing 20 to 30 hours of, training in a week. So obviously there were some huge benefits there, but let's, maybe you can address that and then also address how you work the strength training in so that you weren't overcooked when you were going for your runs.
So I would say, like taking a little step back saying, life and all the different things we do in life are stressors. I don't have kids. I don't have a wife. I don't have, during the summer training for the Grand Teton, my only job was coaching. So, I mean, all in all, most of my battery was able to be used specifically just towards running, towards this one goal. I had the luxury of not having to work 40 hours a week, bring the kids to school, make meals for the kids and the family. I didn't have to do any of that. So, I mean, I think that's important to note is if I had that, if I was still bartending 40 hours a week, had a couple kids, like, God, there's no way I could put 30 hours of training in. Like, that would be insane. That would zap anyone so fast. So that is one caveat to take note of is, I did have the luxury last summer of devoting essentially 100% of my time to this goal. So, I mean, that is important, I think, to know. Your second question with, splitting up time spent on the running versus strength training, etc. For the most part, a lot of the strength training I do nowadays, like I said, is extremely specific to what my goals are, and also extremely specific to my personal relationship with running and the injuries that I have had, and the injuries that I, as an athlete, am susceptible to. So a lot of the strength training is wrapped up into that as well. So like an example of a day that I would strength train would be on, like, let's say I got a Tuesday tempo workout, right? So, I do, Tuesday tempo and focus first and foremost on the running part of that day, because that's the main goal is the running. And then add into that hard day of that tempo run in the morning, and then be able to, lift weights at night and spend 45 minutes to 60 minutes doing, specific workouts to me. So, 2 to 3 days of strength training a week, usually trying to stack those onto other harder effort days, but making sure there's, I try to aim for a minimum of 6 hours in between. And the reason I want to put 6 hours in between those two things is because I want to make sure that I'm fully ready for this strength training workout and I can put everything into it. I want to be fully recovered from my run. I want to take in all my post-run carbs and protein, give my bones and my body a chance to rest, and then go do the strength training. So I try to stack them on hard days, keep hard days hard, and then keep your easy days easy. Recovery, regrowth doesn't happen without recovery,
Yeah. It's been a fascinating conversation, Michelino, and I really appreciate you doing this. What's next for you?
I got the ultra competitive Twisted Fork 15K coming up this weekend.
A lot of great runners there. Yeah.
It's actually really competitive. Christian Allen's racing, and I haven't raced him yet. So I'm
Yeah.
excited to get my butt kicked by the short distance guys. But I'm
And
going to
you're
go do that
doing
as a little
the what distance are you doing?
the 15K.
15K. Okay, so you're going short.
So going short with reason too. Doing Broken Arrow 46K the week after that, and then I'm not in the best shape of my life right now. A little bit of a knee injury this past winter that unfortunately held me back a little bit, but things are looking great. So that Twisted Fork, Broken Arrow. After that, I'll do some special projects that I have kind of coming up that I want to train for. But then I just got a bib for OCC.
Oh,
so
congratulations.
Yeah, so I'm
That's
stoked
exciting.
on that. I get to go give that another shot, and most of my summer will be geared towards that, and then hopefully get a berth on the U.S. mountain running team and be able to go race in Spain in September.
Excellent. Well, I really appreciate it. It's been a fascinating conversation, learning about the history of the FKT up on the Grand Teton, talking about the controversy, and especially just learning how you approached it from an athletic standpoint. I think there's so many great things we could learn from this accomplishment that you've had. And for those of you listening, if you enjoyed this conversation and want to see further success of this podcast, please share this with your friends, all of that stuff. Like, subscribe, comment, share, all of the above. If you have an idea of a topic that you would like covered, or you would like to contact us in any way, just send us an email, info@tracerfitness.com. Or you can message us on Instagram, Tracer Fitness. Let us know how we can bring you more conversations, what you want to hear, what you are struggling with in your running, what topics you need covered. And Michelino, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, thanks for having me, Joey. I'm really stoked that it's the first time anyone's asked about the training leading up to the Grand Teton. Everybody wants to hear about the gossip and the juiciness of it. And thanks for allowing me a platform to talk about, the 99% of the hard work that nobody saw. So I really do appreciate you having me on, and stoked to be here.
Absolutely. We could talk all day, but I'm going to call it because we'll set a record on. We'll have the longest known time of a podcast if I keep going. But of course, there's about 20 questions I still want to ask you. But we'll do that offline sometime.
Yeah, we'll do that. We'll do that soon in person.
Yeah, sounds great. Hey, thanks so much.
Cheers, Joey. Thanks for having me.